Welcome back to the studio today. We're going to be wrapping up another one of the quilts that we started several months ago. This was the Alley Catz, and we've kind of been running those in conjunction with the Dog Park Alley Catz each month, so we were doing one of the blocks of each, and we have the finished quilt top. That quilt top is loaded on the machine already. I have the quilt basted with the batting and the backing in place. I'm going to be using the IntelliQuilter again today to quilt this top, and I'm going to take you over to the computer so we could use the design wall again and show you how easy that is to incorporate a design and then pick out different quilting designs on the Urban Elements website and see more or less what they might look like if they were quilted out. So we'll be taking you inside to do that. Also, because I don't have the design that I'm ultimately going to be using, I'm going to show you how to download that, open a zip file, put that onto a USB stick, and we'll be bringing that out to the studio as well and loading the new design on the IntelliQuilter tablet. So let's go inside and we'll get this going and we'll wrap up Alley Catz for the year. As you can see, we're here at the Urban Elements homepage. I have already logged in to protect my security settings. So what we're going to do first is go to Design Wall. And you can see here there are some basic instructions about how to use the design wall. We'll be adding quilting designs by clicking on the D on each page that we want to select. We'll be selecting a quilt to put up there on the board by using Browse and then Upload, and we can select thread color if we want to play with that. Looks like first I'm going to have to clear what I have already on here. That was from my last video, and I'm going to clear all. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit Browse and go to my file folder and go to my downloads, because I know I have a picture of the Alley Catz quilt here. I'm going to open that up. That's loaded it here, as you can see. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit Upload Image, which will bring it onto my design wall. Takes just a second, but now you can see the finished Alley Catz top. Now that that's loaded, I could go to select the design that I'm going to be using, and I wanted to use something that looked similar to a ball of yarn. So I'm just going to put in yarn. And that brings up Yarn Tangle, which is the design that I'm going to be using. Now you could go through and select multiple designs and use them as samples to see what they look like, and you can play with that on your own time. But for simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and hit D. This will load that design into my options of things to put onto the quilt. If you had multiple things, you could do multiple designs and see which one works best. But I'm going to go ahead and click Add to Canvas, and that has brought the design down here. Now you can see that the thread color is black, and I'm okay with that for the time being, but you could certainly change that if you feel like you want to see what other options look like. I won't be using black thread. I'm going to be using a really light blue thread, which will pick up the background. But you could add to canvas multiple times, and you can also size this once you get them loaded. There are little handles here that you could size this up and down to scale, just to see what they would look like, because if you're using digital, you could do that anyway on the program. With paper, you could always request to have a design sized up or down, and I believe they charge $2 per paper panto to do that. But you can just continue adding these to canvas, and they will just keep loading additional copies of this so that you can see what it is going to look like overall. And I'm pretty happy with that. It goes with the background both the border and the background. I don't think it'll be too obtrusive over the quilting design if we choose low contrast thread. And so that's what we're going to use. If you wanted to, from here, you could add to cart, and then you could go ahead and purchase it. Or if this was not one that you wanted to use, you could go ahead and hit delete, and it will delete that from your options. But we've already selected it. So we're going to proceed to the next step. And that is going to be loading the design, which I have purchased, onto a USB stick and get that loaded onto the machine. So I'm going to close this out and see how long it takes to close. And then I can open up my file folder, my little file icon, and find the design that I purchased. And let's see, we should have it in downloads, and here it is, my yarn tangle. So if I double click on that, I can hit extract there at the top. And I'm just waiting for that to open. Now I have all of my designs, and I'm going to be using the IntelliQuilter, the IQ file. So I'm going to copy that. But before I do, I want to go back to Urban Elements page. I forgot to make a note of what the standard size of this design is. I just like to add that to the name when I'm copying and pasting it, so that when I'm on the IQ, I know what the standard size for it is. It just gives me a point of reference. Waiting for that to open, and I'll click on yarn again. If I can spell it. And it says a single row is 6.5 inches. So that's what I needed to know. I can open it here, but I've already seen that it said 6.5. Right here, 6.5 inches in one row, which means I'm going to be able to sew multiple rows of this without rolling up the quilt. So that's what I needed to know. I'm going to go ahead and select this file. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to put my USB stick into the computer, and we'll see that that's going to open up a new port. Transcend is the name of my design, so in the pattern section I've copied. I'm going to go ahead and select paste. And now I'm going to open that up. Here is yarn tangle here at the top of my file list. I'm going to go ahead and rename this, because I don't need all of this confusing inventory number at the beginning. So I'm going to delete that. So it just comes up as yarn tangle. And before my file extension, I'm just going to type 6.5, which is how tall the design is. And now it's been renamed Yarn Tangle 6.5. I know when I'm loading it onto the IQ now how big the design was originally designed at, which will help me when I'm formatting it on the IQ. And I can go ahead and take out the USB stick. I'm going to close this file folder out. Down here in this bottom right hand corner, I can select eject, safely remove hardware, eject media. So I've selected that. I'm just hit eject transcend, and so now it's safe for me to remove that USB stick. And now I can take the USB stick out to the carriage house. I can load it onto the tablet, and we can get quilting on Alley Catz so that we could get started on that. Now that I'm back out to the quilting studio, I'm going to load designs, and so I'll select that, and I want to hit load, and it's asking me to remove the tablet and insert the USB stick, which I will do. Got the USB stick loaded, it's waiting for the drive, it's copying the patterns, and file transfer complete. So I can go ahead and remove the USB stick and put this back on the machine, making sure it's securely in place, and I've locked the brace in place so it doesn't vibrate off. And I can go ahead and get the quilt ready to load the design. Now I'm going to measure the quilt really quick. It is about 47 by 57, so I'm going to go ahead and start a new design. Design sew quilt, start new. Do I want to eliminate the work in progress? Yes, and I'm going to start the clock over, which I don't really use. I'm going to load a pantograph. I'm going to enter the rectangle manually because I don't have the space to measure the whole quilt. So I'm going to do 47, and that didn't work, 4-7, enter by 5-7, enter. So we have 47 by 57, hit continue. I'm going to hit finished. Now my design is going to be in the downloads that I'm going to be using, so I'm going to go to download, and you can see here yarn tangles 6.5. That's perfect. I know exactly how tall the design's supposed to be, so I'm going to select that, and I'm going to select it again because it's going to be the same for even and odd rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rows that it's starting out at, but I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to hit the gap and pull this closer together so you can't really see the rows. And now I'm going to hit row height. My pattern height on here is like 15 inches, which is, I think, way too big. So I'm going to go into the computer with the keyboard here, and I'm going to hit maybe 7 and see what that does. My pattern height is still 9 inches. It's a little bit big, so I'm going to go back in and change it again. Maybe just try 6.5. And now my pattern height is 8.5 inches, and I think that is a little bit better looking. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finish and accept that. And I'm going to go ahead and accept. Do I want to commit? Yes. And now I'm going to hit sew quilt. I'm going to select the first pattern, which would be up here. Continue. I'm going to use Panto's sequencing assistance. And how do I want the rows quilted? Always left to right or alternating? And I like to alternate. It just saves time. So if I start on the left of the first row, it gets to the right. On the second row, it'll start on the right and go to the left. So it just makes it a little bit easier without having to go back and forth each time. So I'm going to hit alternate. I like to tie off at the end of each row, and I'm going to do the whole quilt sequencing. So now it's finished. My start 1 and end 1 is here. Start 2 and end 2 is here. And it just goes back and forth as you see. 2 different shades of green, which I know are hard to see. That shows the different rows. And what we have are 10 rows total to get the whole quilt done. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt. I repeated the whole process. It only took me a minute. I've got my machine where it needs to be. It's already moved to its first start position. So all I have to do is hit start. I already have my thread and bobbin loaded. Right now it's sewing at the very top of the quilt. It's just going to do a very, very small partial row, and then we'll get into the actual quilting pattern, and I'll bring you in when we see what that's starting to look like. We're done with the very first row for the quilting, and all I had to do was pull the thread up. I didn't really have to move anything, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit start. And this is going to be the beginning of row 2. I didn't have to roll up the quilt yet because we've got plenty of room. I might even be able to do the third row without rolling it up. We'll just have to wait and see when it's finished. As you can see, I'm using a very, very light thread. It's actually a powder blue thread. It's just going to be pulling in the blue background and the blue trim, but it's not going to be very visible. You can see the size of the loops are just a couple inches high. It really matches the size of the loops that are in the background fabrics, and I think this will end up being a quick and pretty good choice. The remaining time for the entire quilt is showing at 36 minutes. It's also showing the length of this design. I don't know if that works for thread, 87 or 83.6 yards. I've never really paid attention to that. Maybe later I'll figure out if that's actually thread usage or just the linear amount of the design. So I'm going to go ahead and let this stitch out, and I'm going to resist the temptation to pull those threads out, which might shift the quilt but not the pattern. We have done the partial row at the top. Now we're back to the left-hand side, the end of row 2. I'm going to go ahead and do that finish tie and pull up the needle and the foot. And I'm going to hit start because we don't even need to move for the next row. We have enough room in the top of the quilt. So we should be able to do 2 passes on each roll up. So I'll hit start again. And if all goes well, we'll get our third row finished, which is 2 complete rows and 1 partial row. Then we'll have to do a roll up. By utilizing the screen and pulling the machine forward, I know that the red design has been quilted and the greens alternate with rows. So this kind of citrusy green is going to be my next row. If I move the machine as far as it will go forward, I can see the crosshairs here, but the design ends here. So I know I don't have enough room to do my next row without rolling up the quilt. So I'm just going to take my crosshairs and put it where the highest point of the next row needs to be and drop my needle. Now I'm going to go ahead and roll up the quilt. I'm going to loosen my side tension and get the quilt rolled up, and then we'll come back in and see what that looks like. Someone recently asked me about the side clamps that I use. These are the clamps that came with the Bernina frame, and they're very heavy duty. but I've never used them. They seem like really heavy. I didn't like the way they added weight to the side. So I just bought tarp clips. These are used to clip onto a tarp to hold it in place if you're painting, or if you have a tarp over a boat or something. They sell these in the paint department at large DIY stores, and they also sell them on Amazon. There's a couple different kinds. This particular kind screws on, and I do have one of these on the left hand side, but I prefer these. They just pinch and clip, and they come on and off. And I just use 2 pins in the edge of the quilt just to give the teeth something to hold on to. Now I know there's all kinds of things sold on the market to hold the edges in place that do the whole length, but I've been quilting for 30 years, and sometimes it's just hard to teach an old dog new tricks. You find something you're comfortable with, and I don't really feel the need to change it. I'm happy with the time it takes for me to move these and the amount of tension it gives to the side, so that's just what I use. Let's see if I can get this right for the camera. I'm going to hit realign because I've just advanced the quilt, and I'm going to touch the bottom curve of the last thing I have sewn, and I'm going to have my needle hovering right over that point. So I'm going to hit continue. It says move the needle to that position. I have, and so now it's gone down to my row 6 starting point. So I'm going to do 1 stitch, pull up my thread and hit start. And make sure I have it on manual, which I always forget. And it's going to go ahead off and running on row 6. I should be able to do row 6 and 7 before I roll up the quilt. And at this point we only have 20 minutes left on this design. I've rolled up my quilt one last time. I've taken the lower leader off, and I've basted the 3 edges. I can move my machine all the way past the bottom of the quilt, so I know that whatever I have left to quilt, I don't have to roll up the machine or realign anything, so I just have to readjust it one last time. So I'm going to hit realign. I'm going to go to the bottom of one of the previous curves, the lowest one that I can find, closest to the edge. So I have my needle over that curve. I've selected it with my little cursor, and I'm going to hit continue. It asked me to move the needle there. I did. So now it's going to move to start number 9. It'll sew across 9, and then I can just go ahead and restart it. It will sew across 10. So I'm going to do that now. And as far as this goes, then the quilt will be finished. I'm pretty sure I was fairly accurate with the length of this quilt, so I don't think I have to do any adjustment on reducing or increasing the size of the pattern, but we'll see that in just a minute. So I'll let you see this sew out just for a minute, but I know you've seen that before, so I won't bore you to death with it. I have 7 minutes left on this quilt, and then it's just a matter of popping it off the frame and giving it a quick trim, and we can go ahead and wrap up this. Well, that's it. We started with the Block of the Month kit. This was a complete kit. All of the pieces were laser cut and pre-fused with Steam 2, so it made it really easy to put these blocks together. It's just a process of peel, place, and press. So peel the paper backing off, put them in place. You have a full placement sheet that also can be used to reproduce the pattern with your own fabric later. To place the pieces, when you get them in place, they are repositionable until you fuse them, and then you have to fuse them with a hot iron or with a blow dryer if you're using it on glass or wood or something. But you also need a steam component. So I don't use steam in my iron, I do a spritz bottle, but you do have to have that steam component because that's part of the product, steam 2. So we have all the blocks done. We put the sashing and the inner border on and the outer border. So we finished with our quilt. You can see that I used a blue to pick up the background. I could have used orange or purple, but I really liked this squirrely fabric in the background. It reminded me of a ball of yarn that a cat had unspooled. We used the same pattern on the outside border, but it was in black just to kind of confine the pattern. And I didn't use a busy color thread for the quilting. I thought that the pattern on the background was sufficient. Same for the border. So I used a low contrast thread, which will just give you the texture of the quilting without being an additional component. If I had used just a white background with a white border, then I could have used a variegated thread, and that would have added some of the same interest that I got with the pattern in the fabric. So this is our finished quilt, and on the back I just used a solid white fabric, and probably here it's a little bit easier to see some of that quilting pattern because there isn't anything obstructing your view. Because this is a wall quilt, I didn't mind using white. It also goes with kind of the modern theme of this quilt. So this is another one finished. I just have to get some, I'll put a sleeve on it and then the binding, and then we can get this hung up, and this will be another project for the books. So thanks for joining us today and for this whole process as we went through the Alley Catz Block of the Month, which was a complete kit. Just so you know, all of these blocks are also available individually on the website. So if you just wanted one cat for the back of a jacket, up the leg of a jeans, like this one might be really cute on your jean leg, backpack, lunchbox, pillow. There's a lot of different ways you could use these. Again, we've used them on wood, glass, metal, canvas, burlap, you name it. If you can't use it with an iron, you can use it with the blow dryer. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. No telling what I'll be doing in here. So I don't know from one day to the next. It all depends on how the ducks line up for any given project. But I have a couple things coming up that I'm really excited to do, so I'm looking forward to get those started. Talk to you next time.